An identity crisis can be many things. Losing your sense of purpose, a midlife crisis, returning to civilian life, or simply feeling like you don't belong. My life has been one ongoing identity crisis after another. I've started this podcast to help deal with my own demons and negative self-talk, and to ultimately and hopefully learn that I'm not alone, and that these thoughts and feelings aren't unique to me. So if this helps you too, then one by one we can come together, heal ourselves, and move forward with our goals and dreams with a sense of belief, happiness, and purpose. Welcome back to the Identity Crisis Podcast. I'm JNewtz, and my guest today is film producer and past performer Lucinda Bruce. Welcome to the show, Lucinda.
Thank you very much. How's it going?
Things over here are fantastic. Now, I want to talk about your journey. First and foremost, how did you get into filmmaking, TV, movies? What was the push into that?
Wow. I've always wanted to do it ever since I was little. It's been a dream of mine ever since I could probably walk and talk. I've loved performing and singing and dancing, and my very kind of first foray into it, I guess, was sort of for friends and family, and I would go up on stage and sing, you know, a makeshift stage and sing for family or at birthday parties and stuff like that, or just entertain. But I was generally a pretty quiet kid otherwise, but I just always dreamed about becoming an actor and becoming kind of, you know, you dream of yourself winning an Academy Award up on stage and stuff like that. And I didn't know really what it meant at that time. I just knew I wanted to do it. So acting was almost always my first love. And I did a lot of acting classes when I was younger, sort of early teens, you know, around 10 or 11, 12. And I got into acting schools and different bits and pieces, and, you know, I was writing my own music and doing a lot of just creative stuff, really. I was writing spec scripts before I even knew what a spec script was. So I've got a tub in my room here full of scripts that I wrote from over the last 30 or 40 years, where it's just been like stuff that I've written that I've thought of and for TV shows and different things like The X-Files and Stargate and different stuff, and my own ideas as well. And so basically I got to about, 17, and I was really keen on acting and I loved it. And I was doing a drama group in Melbourne, and I was doing live stage productions and acting on stage and different things. And then I kind of had my confidence kind of just like a rug pulled out from underneath me, and I was told I wasn't sort of pretty enough for the screen. I wasn't sort of what they wanted on camera.
Wow. And
it really kind of, you know, at 17, as it does, it kind of really puts a hole in your confidence, and you go, well, okay, if I can't do acting, I don't know what I'll do. Like I'll have to go behind the camera then.
Mm.
And then I shifted my gaze from kind of being in front of the camera and sort of on stage to figuring out what went on behind the camera. And then at sort of 21, I went to uni and learnt audiovisual technology and all the technical stuff, and got work in a broadcast company, and it was pretty horrible. And the experiences I had were pretty subpar with the industry, and eventually I kind of got out of it and left it and went on to do normal work and normal jobs in my mid-20s. And then I suffered a spinal injury at 26, and then I had a blow with cancer at 29. So at 31, when I got the all clear, I spent the last 6 years of my life basically in rehab and having surgery and stuff for all these different things. And I realised that life was too short and I needed to go back to pursuing my passion of acting. And I thought there was no way I was going to make it in Australia because the industry wasn't really anything back then.
Mm.
So I moved to Vancouver, and one of the first things I did was I got a role in a feature film, which was really cool, and then that never happened. And then I ended up volunteering BTS for a short film that a friend of mine, who I had a bit of a crush on at the time, was in. So I kind of volunteered for that. And 2 weeks before we shot it, they kind of made me the producer on it. And I was like, cool, no idea what that means, but awesome. I'll do that. I'll do that job. So that is where it all started. And that was 2013 when I volunteered on that short film. It was written by Michael Denis, and he acted in it. It was directed by Mackenzie Gray, and it starred Alex Pornovich from Hawkeye and Jerry Wasserman from iRobot, and all these amazing actors that I was, meeting for the first time and working with for the first time, and hearing all these amazing stories back then. And they've gone on to do amazing things. Alex Pornovich has really gone on with his career now. But yeah, since then, that's just what I've been doing, producing for the last 11 years now. And I got my first feature film from that short film, and it's just snowballed from there. And now I've got about 30 or 40 projects under my belt in the last 11 years, and yeah, it's been good. So that's the journey in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I must say there's a lot to digest in there. So I'm gonna rewind a little bit and pick up on one of the first things that you said to me. You said you were 17 and you basically got told that you're not going to make it because you're not pretty enough for the screen. These days in 2024, that is obviously totally unacceptable. People shouldn't be saying that. The industry and the world has moved on. There's a lot more acceptance of anybody, body positivity and other bits and pieces like that. And of course, it's a shame that all that time ago that didn't exist. But how does it feel? Going through that process, not just as a woman, but as a performer, how does it feel and how does it affect your life, sort of knowing that one comment can crush all your dreams?
It took me a long time to realize that it had that impact on me. I think, I felt it, of course, at the time. I was very disappointed, but when you don't have anybody else around you who understands the industry any better or has the ability to connect you, I mean, I had a lot of talent agents, saying that they wanted to rep me, but I needed to lose weight or I needed to do this. And it just felt odd because I wasn't a big kid. I was pretty skinny when I was in my teenage years. And I remember just thinking at the time, oh, well, that must be true. And feeling sad about it, but then going, well, I'm not going to let it stop me from following my dream. I'll just find another way. So it was kind of weird in the sense that I didn't realize until probably more recently how much of an impact those words had on me at the time and how they've had a lasting impact on me. And, your self-confidence takes a huge hit when someone tells you you're not pretty enough for your dream, and it wasn't like I could look at the TV and see somebody that really looked like me to kind of validate what I looked like and whatnot. Like, they were all models and gorgeous and super skinny and pretty. And it was difficult to kind of convince myself otherwise for a very long time. Obviously never, because I never actually went back to acting because that had always kind of haunted me and always kind of kept me thinking, well, I couldn't do it. But then I got cast as this lead in this big feature film, which turned out to be not a legitimate feature, unfortunately, and that's another story. But you do not realize how much people's words can affect you mentally and overall when you do these sorts of things. And I loved acting so much, and I just sort of like, I know I'm good at it. I can do it because I was on stage performing and people wanted to rep me, but every single time it was like, well, yeah, I just don't know where I would put you. I don't know what I would put you in, and I didn't go down the sort of the well-tread path of Neighbours or Home and Away, things like that, because I just was told that I was not pretty enough. So it's a lot to take on. It's a lot to kind of work out in my own self and my confidence and how I then move forward from that. Obviously, I changed my whole career path. And these days, I don't know, it's hard to kind of, because at 17, it's such an impressionable young age. And your parents are always going to tell you that you're pretty. Like, your parents are always going to tell you that you're beautiful, that you're like, they're biased,
Of course.
Because, but they're biased, and that's the problem.
Because you're theirs.
Yeah, that's right. and bless them, that's what you would hope they would say to you, but at the end of the day they're biased because you're their child, and these are random strangers, that say, that come up and say to you, like, it was after a stage production that I'd done, and they were like, well, you are very talented, and I can tell that you're talented, but I don't know what to do with you. You're not typically pretty, and you're not really pretty enough for me to, I just don't know where I'd put you, kind of thing. And I couldn't even tell you who that was to this day. It was just one of like several sort of talent agents that were invited to this production, to see us perform out of this drama school. And it really, it stuck with me, obviously. And even though I didn't let it ultimately stop me from pursuing my dream, it certainly did change the career path that I took in pursuing the dream.
Of course. Do you miss performing, or do you still sort of hold on to that, horrible feedback that you got all those years ago, and it stops you from performing?
I think it's still in there. I think it still controls me a little bit too much to this day. I love the idea of performing and going back into acting and doing a role, and I've even, like teased myself with the idea of doing just a short film and just doing like a little piece for myself and writing something for myself that I could do simple. But the overwhelming kind of like fear or lack of confidence that comes from putting myself out there, from all those years of believing what those people said to me, is definitely the elephant in the room for me when I kind of go to even sort of move forward with something like that. So what I tend to do now is, what I've been doing for a long time, ever since, like, even in that first short film that I produced, I volunteer to be an extra, because it gives me a little bit of a moment where I'm seen, I'm on camera, and I've done it for nearly, like, any film that I could. I've sort of done it for, and I'll be an extra, and it gives me a little bit of a taste of just enjoying that. Oh, I'm in front of the camera for a minute, and it doesn't take away then from what I'm doing as a producer and what my focus is on while there's a film shooting. But I do. It gives me a little, just a little bit of happiness.
Yeah, and rightly so. Rightly so,
Mm-hmm.
because you still need to obviously fill that cup as such. And it's interesting just listening to you talk. I mean, you and me have had a somewhat of a very shared experience, and it's not a unique experience. And the thing is, a lot of actors out there probably think it is unique to them, and it's not. Whilst I never heard the words "you're not pretty enough," which would be strange if I had heard that. I would have said, "Thank you. I don't think that's the point." But when I used to live in Australia, I was always told, "Look, you're just not Australian enough." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? Like, is it my look? Is it my voice? Like, can you just be more Australian? What the fuck does that even mean?" It was so weird, and like you, I mean, I spent a long time wanting to, write a short film, produce a short film, but because I'd always been hearing this feedback of, well, you're not really Australian enough, or same as you, we just don't know where we'd put you because you're not this, but you're not that, and blah, blah, blah. What I found is it took such a hit on my confidence that even writing something to want to make something for myself, it stopped me so much, because there's that part of you that says, is it egotistical for me to write something, act in it, and direct it, and produce it? Because it's like, seemingly you start to think, well, the outside was going to go, oh, it's just a you show rather than a collaborative effort. And if anything, it's just you wanting to pursue your passions. It's just you can't do it through the typical means. So you're going to try and do it through your creativity. But then all that horrible feedback that's still sitting in your subconscious mind comes and goes, no, because that's not the way it works. And how dare you? Don't be so egotistical.
Yes, you do tend to put it into a pile of like, oh, you're just kind of, definitely kind of stroking your own ego by doing this. And it's not to say that there aren't people out there that are doing that. But the thing is that ego, as long as it's in healthy doses, is actually quite healthy and natural. And we should all have a healthy ego. And the problem is that we don't. And our egos have often been destroyed or undermined a lot of our lives. If you don't fit a certain mold, or you don't fit into a certain group. I mean, I was bullied at school and everything, so when you don't tend to feel like you belong anywhere, you lose a lot of confidence and your ego just plummets, so you don't have one at all. And you know, you do, when you do try to kind of talk yourself up a little bit and put yourself to a position where you can feel good about what you're achieving and what you're doing, there's inevitably, especially in Australia, that tall poppy syndrome, where someone will come along and cut you off at the knees and say, no, how dare you try to be better than everyone else, when that's not really what you are doing.
Yeah.
You know, it's more about, well, I'm just trying to be creative and express myself creatively and showcase what I can do to the world, because that's what we have to do. You know, like, if nobody knows what we can do, then they don't know what we can do, and how else can we show them, apart from doing these things that are then determined by someone else to be unhealthy or egotistical or selfish.
And the thing is, when you really think about it, the entertainment industry in the world, whether that's, you know, film, music, anything, you could argue that the whole industry exists for creative misfits as such, because we don't belong anywhere else. But even then, the sad thing is, you know, you want to go, oh, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is sort of, you can tell this is my people, but then some of those people within that creative misfit community go, yeah, but we don't want you. And you go, but why not? and the thing is, I remember always being told acting, it's not so much just a cutthroat profession as far as the competition that you face. It's cutthroat from an emotional point of view, because, you know, rejection is 99% of an actor's journey, from the basic short film to a fully fledged, you know, $200 million feature film. Rejection is always there. And sometimes, depending on your mental health state and so forth, and what's happening in your life at the time, experience you've had, that rejection can either be, oh yeah, cool, no worries, I'll move on to the next one, or that rejection can debilitate you so much that it basically stops you for 6 or more months.
Yeah, it is. It can be, and it's very hard as an actor. I think, you know, you do have to have a very thick skin, and I mean, at 17, you wouldn't, you know, unless you've been a child actor and you've been used to it like your whole life, and getting rejected or getting told that you're not good enough. But even then, it's still, there's a lot of processing and emotion to get through to come to that realization and to be okay with what you've gone through. And it's, you know, and I'm not surprised that a lot of child actors that have had really successful childhoods are either, you know, on substance abuse now, or, you know, have struggled to kind of get past those characters that they were once upon a time.
Yeah.
But, you know, it is a life of rejection, essentially, and you do have to have a thick skin. And coming from a background where I've, you know, experienced that, you know, as a producer now, you know, you're more aware of what you're doing when you're turning an actor down for a role. And there's this balance between how do I tell these 200 actors who applied for this job they're not good enough without saying you're not good enough, or so you kind of learn other ways of doing it, and you're saying, well, look, you were good, but you weren't, you know, this is kind of where you went wrong. And a lot of producers don't do that. They don't spend the time telling actors why they didn't get a role, and that is part of the problem, I think, because then they're left to think, well, maybe it was this or maybe it was that, and it doesn't actually help them hone their craft or get better.
No, because the thing is, sometimes it can literally be, you might have a certain look in your mind, and you'll bring some actors in who you can see through their headshots, oh, that matches the look that I've got in my mind. But then somebody might come in who's a complete anomaly to that, and they just might have something in their personality or just a sort of a way that they present themselves where you go, I didn't know what I was really looking for, but I now know that it's that, and it's not what I thought I wanted. So why the hell did I see these 50 people who had that look when that's what I needed all the time? And as you said, you can't give those 50 or 100 or 200 actors the feedback, because how do you tell somebody there was just something unexplainable that person did that we realized, no, that's actually what we want? You can't tell someone, go off and work on that. And I guess it's one of those things that Michael Caine has famously said in his acting in film video, something happens to some very, fortunate people that you can really only sort of see through the camera. And that's the unfortunate thing, you can go to all the acting schools for years and years and years, but it does come down to what happens on the camera during that audition. If the producer and director see some sort of magic where they go, that's exactly what I'm looking for, it's very hard to give that feedback to an actor to go try to get to that stage.
That's right, and it does come back to what is the director or the producers looking for? Is it a look, or is it the skill and the talent, and what's the delivery? Like, I will often let looks go and let the look of somebody go for talent. I would rather have a talented actor who doesn't quite look the part, for whatever reason, and have someone else who's come in who looks exactly the part but can't act. I would say to them, you need to do workshop. You need to kind of get some more, practice and skill behind you and whatnot. But I would not pick the person who looked the part just because they looked the part. I would pick the person who could actually deliver the performance, because that's the believability of it. Unless the role is specifically a looks-only role and it's for whatever reason, whether it's good reasons or bad reasons, it is still, for me, it should always sort of come back to talent and what an actor can bring, the depth that they can bring to a character and what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So, but it's hard because not everybody's the same.
Well, it is, and sometimes it also comes down to miscommunication. Many years ago, one of my friends was actually one of the directors of Neighbours, and Neighbours at the time, and probably still to this day, a lot of these TV shows, they had multiple directors who would direct a block of say 4 or 6 episodes, and then they work on the next 4, and they go into pre-production and so forth. But my friend Grant Fenn, who's sadly no longer with us, I was at his place one day, and he said to me, "Oh, look, there's a role coming up. I think you should go for it. Could you get me a self-tape, and could you get it to the studios tomorrow?" I said to him, "Yeah, sure, no worries. I'll bring it in tomorrow." I didn't have a damn thing. So I went home, learnt something, shot something against the garage wall, put the thing together, dropped it into the studios the next day. "Hey, can you pass it on to Grant Fenn?" Not a problem. Anyway, about a week later, he said to me, "Oh, look, we've shortlisted everybody. We've got about 20 actors that we've shortlisted. You're now in the top 3. We're shortlisting." I'm like, "Wow, this could be fantastic." It then got down to you're in the top 2. I'm thinking, "Oh my God, this could actually be really cool for me." Then I got told a little while later, "Look, sorry, I wanted you to be in it. As a director, I said I want Jonathan, but the producer who overrode me said, no, I want this person." And he said, and Jonathan, when I watched the tape, he said that person had the look. And it was only then that I got disclosed, he got the role because he looked like a builder, and where the role's for a tradesman. And I said to him, had you told me that, I would have scruffed up my hair, put my overalls on, and I would have looked that way. And it just came down to that small bit of miscommunication where you go down, and I remember the worst thing was I actually spent a week with him on set during the time of the filming. So I met the guy who got the role over me, and I'm like, okay, I can see he's got the builder look, and it really was that thing of you go, oh well, you can't change that, and it was hard to swallow. But once again, it comes down to that miscommunication. I didn't ask the right questions, and I wasn't given the right information at the same time, and I like what you have to say, that as a producer, you try to give as much feedback as possible or direction as possible so that it softens the blow in some ways, rather than basically say, "You're just not good enough, buddy."
Yeah, exactly. It does help, and it also then, I think, hopefully, not always, but you always hope that it kind of takes away the personal, if anybody feels like it's a personal attack on them as an actor or a personal attack on them as a person, you kind of hopefully are dispelling anything that they kind of take away from that. It is a business at the end of the day. You have to sell something and you have to make money from it so that you can do it again. And ultimately, there are things that sometimes are out of your control when making movies or making decisions around films. And as a producer, generally, your name, as a producer, your name is on it, and you want to have the ability to control certain decisions around those things, and usually the director will come in and make the decisions on who's acting in what, but depending on how the setup is done, the producer could have ultimate call on who gets put into the part. And half of me agrees with it and half of me doesn't. Like the half of me that's creative and kind of goes, well, the director has a vision, so the director, in a way, it's important that they get to pick the actors that are playing, that they're working with, bringing those characters to life. And then there's another part of me that's like, yeah, but if they bring in somebody, there's a balance, because, you've got the producer half of me is like, well, that's cool because, I do want them to have creative control as a director and have input and everything. But at the end of the day, I'm the one that has to sell it. And I'm the one that has to, make money. And there's all these business pressures around these decisions that producers have pushing against them where you're like, yeah, no, this person is better, more talented, but that other person has an Academy Award. You know what I mean? Like, you just never know, like, what you're up against sometimes. And there's a lot of actors out there that aren't working at the moment that won Academy Awards and would help sell a film, potentially. And it's sometimes that is purely coming back to a business decision of, well, of course I want Academy Award winning actor in my film, rather than Joe Blow, who's not done anything. This is his first feature film. He's not going to sell the film because nobody knows who he is.
Yeah, that's right.
And it becomes very, very difficult very quickly as a human being to kind of be like, which is probably why a lot of producers don't have moral compasses. I don't know. I mean, I certainly do, and I struggle with it. I can't speak for other producers. I can only speak for me. But, I love the balance. I love finding the balance in that and going, well, this actor is super talented. Yes, they're unknown. They've never won awards. They don't have an Academy Award on their shelf, but I know they can deliver the part in such a way that it would probably draw the audience in. And that's just as important as having the notoriety as somebody attached with an award. So it does become difficult sometimes. It's very hard to make these decisions. And unfortunately, you do have to balance out, selling the film, making it successful, which isn't guaranteed ever.
Yeah.
You could pick the Academy Award winner and still have a flop of a film. There's no real definitive guideline as to what's going to make a film successful.
Oh, no. The thing is, we've all seen movies or sort of TV movies and so forth where it's just been a horrible story. It's been a really bad script, and no matter who's in it, and I mean, I'll openly say this because I didn't like it. It's not my cup of tea. But Suicide Squad or whatever it was from... or was it Marvel with Will Smith and Margot Robbie? Is it Suicide Squad?
It was DC, I think. Suicide Squad, wasn't it? DC?
It was DC. I remember seeing it. I got dragged off to see that at the movies. And it was the worst film I think I've actually ever seen. Because it literally took forever to get somewhere. Then the group gets formed. Then they go off to do their mission. And then suddenly and magically it was all over. And I know it's all, DC, Marvel, comic book based and so forth, but it didn't have that kind of, creative flair to it and so forth. And of course, if you look at it, there was so many people online going, this movie is fucking shit. I think somebody once said, I think this blows more than Batman versus Superman or whatever it was, which equally was fucking terrible. And I got dragged off to that one as well. And it is a real shit, but as you say, there's no guarantee that having an all-star cast is going to mean that movie is successful. Because and we'll talk more about this as well when it comes to the role of the producer. But I know through working with you on movies that it isn't just about making the budget back; it's about making 4 times the budget back before it means that's successful. But before we talk about that element of it, talk to me about what the role of a producer is, because everyone's heard of a producer, but I'm sure that there's many people out there who don't really know what a producer does.
I mean, nobody really does, I don't think. I think, one of the best analogies I always kind of put out there is that it's like you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle and you've got to find all the right pieces and where they fit. And even if you kind of do that and you've successfully finished the puzzle, it doesn't mean anybody's going to look at it, you know what I mean, or see it or want to do anything with it. So it's essentially you're a manager, you're leading a team of people to create a product that you need to sell and sell successfully, in a nutshell. And you're finding the right mixture of people for the right type of product, and that changes from each project to the next. So it's a very fluid, very interchangeable kind of workflow. And there are producers out there that work with the same crew and the same people every time. I do it a little bit, not with everything, but there are certain people I love to work with that if I find the opportunity to bring them into another project, I will. But if I can't, then I don't. You find what works, and you kind of go, okay, well, with this particular project, I've got everything I need. I would love to bring these other people in, but I can't because it's just not going to work. You are more than just a producer. You're more than just a manager. You're effectively a team leader. You're making decisions for the benefit of the whole project, which doesn't always go down well with everybody else that you're leading and managing.
No, and we've got shared experience of that, haven't we?
Yes, absolutely. So, and it is unfortunate that it does happen more often than not. So there's a lot of people out there that I've spoken to that are producing for the first time that just go, I don't understand. Like, why is this bit so difficult? Why am I having this problem with this person? It's like, look, it's a creative field. We're very interesting individuals, creatives. We have a wide gamut of, ways of doing things and approaches to things, like in general, like in everyday life. But we have a little bit more flair to it. We're a little bit more eccentric in some ways. We're a little bit more autoristic, kind of auteur, kind of. Sometimes you get, people like that, or you get very simple creative people that just want to make a simple project and not go overboard with anything. They just want to keep it very simple. And then you've got people that want to make very elaborate, extensively complicated shoots and everything in between. And then you've got all sorts of different personalities that you're managing. And, it can be like you're running a circus and juggling a lot of, different things at the same time and dealing with a lot of different personalities. And, but when you get it right and everything kind of works and flows, it's an amazing experience. And, you meet so many amazing people. And I do love the fact that we don't work with the same people every single time, because you do get to meet so many amazing and wonderful people in this business that are in it for the right reasons, want to be creative, need to be heard, have a voice, and have an amazing story to tell, and they're not getting those opportunities. So I think, being a producer is a number of things. It's being a boss first and foremost. It's being a friend. It's being a psychologist. It's being, a mum or a dad, or it's being all these different things to people when they need it, and providing the support they need to kind of express themselves creatively. So finding the right people in the right jobs, you're not always going to get it right, and you're not always going to make the right decisions, but essentially you are just running a team of people, creating a product that you're trying to sell, like any other business would be.
Absolutely. And of course, a big part of selling that is conventions such as AFM. So talk to me about, well, first of all, what is AFM? And as a producer, what is your role going to AFM, either with a script of an idea or a completed film?
Well, AFM is the American film market, and it's one of 5 or 6 kind of major film markets around the world that's held throughout the year. Another one in Cannes, and then there's one in Toronto, and then Berlin. There's a Berlinale, and then there's what's the other one? South by Southwest is a big one. They're also film festivals. American film market is just a film market on its own. There is no film festival that goes with it. It's been going for 30 or 40 years. It's been around for a while. It was always held in Santa Monica in Los Angeles, California. It's recently, as of this year, moved to Las Vegas, which will be interesting. I am hoping to go, but essentially it is just a marketplace for film, and a lot of distributors and sales agents and networks attend in order to, a lot of sales agents will attend to sell their products to distributors and networks, and that's essentially what the market's about. Then there are independent producers like myself who go along, who try to get in with some of these sales agents while they're there, and they're open to, not all of them, but some of them are open to being pitched new movies and new ideas. Going to AFM the first time can be very overwhelming. I went for the very first time, I think back in 2016, and it already kind of started to change a little bit even at that point in time. But but it was a very fond experience for me, and I remember learning a lot about selling and buying film from some of the people that were there. But I was essentially went on my own the very first time and just kind of blustered my way through it and got a lot of no's and a lot of people saying that's not what we're here for, because as an independent producer, they're there, you're trying to speak to sales agents, but the sales agents, they're trying to sell their films to the networks and distributors. So it's kind of like you're coming in on their turf in a little bit, and you're trying to kind of distract them from what they're doing by trying to sell them some more films that they've already got films that they're trying to sell to distributors and networks. So it's an interesting dynamic. It's not an easy sell to go to the market and get your film kind of in with sales agents and people like that, but it's worth it. It's an interesting place. You get to meet a lot of other independent producers and a lot of sales agents and people that can potentially help if they're open to it. And I think it's just a good experience for an indie producer to go along and see what that's like. I'll be interested to see what it's like in Vegas this year. I don't know if I'm going to be able to go though.
Mm. Well, look, hopefully you can get over there, because I know that you've always loved AFM. You've always had a form of success with a lot of the projects that you've taken over with you. Talk to me about what are the opportunities these days for indie filmmakers? Because look, there are so many people out there who either want to make a long short, say half an hour, or they want to make a fully fledged feature film, which could go for an hour and a half or 2 hours. But then there's the whole thing of, well, how do people see it? Yeah, I may have had a screening with some friends. I hired out a small cinema and so forth, but what now? So as an independent filmmaker and an independent producer for independent films, what options are actually available these days to people?
They're still very similar. Like, obviously cinema is difficult at the moment. Like, once upon a time you could, look at cinema as a way to market your film and things like that as an indie filmmaker. I think that will come back. I might be being very optimistic when I say that, but I think it'll slowly come back with the success of other films. Of course, using examples like Deadpool and Wolverine is a little bit difficult because it's a big film and it's a Marvel film, so it's an established universe and, big names in it, like Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. But for an R-rated film to get over $1 billion at the box office is, like, in this day and age is amazing and very promising for the future of cinema. So I think for independent filmmakers, though, it is a little bit more treacherous, the pathway. Getting a sales agent is usually one of the better ways of kind of getting your film out there to the right people. A sales agent will typically, like at AFM, they'll send out content to distributors and networks around the world, depending on territories and all that sort of stuff. Some sales agents only do certain territories. There are 180 territories in the world. I think that's how many there are. And some sales agents only cover a certain number of them. Some other sales agents do worldwide. Just depends on the sales agent. So talking to sales agents is obviously one way. They're easy to find on the internet. They're not necessarily as easy to create contact with and have a dialogue with. That's why things like AFM can be helpful, because you can go and actually kind of knock on the door of the sales agent, introduce yourself and say, I would, just love to get a card for a contact. I've got this and this and this. Typically it is easy to sell a completed film at AFM, or at least get people to look at it through AFM when it's completed. A little bit more difficult if it's something you haven't made yet, and there's a different process to that. And there isn't exactly one way that's going to, it's not one way fits all, but there's definitely lots of variety in how you go about doing certain things. But feature films and TV shows are still probably the most, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Probably the easiest to market, take to market and to potentially make money off.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of content out there demanding feature length and series things, but to get the financing for them is very difficult. So, and there's lots of different pathways to financing. It could be through friends and family. It could be through private investors, private equity, tax credits, all these different options that you have for financing, and they're not easy to get. So it's difficult to get a film out there, but it's not impossible. And I think getting a producer on board the project early on, or as early as you can, usually they're probably one of the easier things to get on board in terms of reaching out to producers and production companies to potentially look at your script. But you really want to make sure your script is good, is solid, isn't full of grammatical and spelling errors. I'm more forgiving of that sort of stuff because I'm not so sort of hard-edged with my producing. I'll kind of read, something that people send to me. I'm happy to. But it doesn't mean I'll produce it necessarily. So
I guess it comes down to a thing. You need to read something and say, yeah, I want to be a part of the team making this, rather than going, well, it's a project that's come through. Yeah, I'll do it. You need to be invested emotionally into it, don't you?
Yeah, you do. I mean, you also have to feel like it's got legs and it's got somewhere. I mean, you're approaching a producer hoping, like a typical script writer will approach a producer hoping that the producer is answer to all their dreams and hopes. And, typically a producer, yes, there are producers out there that will option a script and pay you a certain amount of money. It could be $1, it could be $15,000, whatever, to option the script from you and own it. Like, they will own it then for 2 years and they will do what they want with it, and they won't consult you and they won't work with you on it unless they want you to be involved in it. I'm not one of those producers. I don't option scripts at all if I can help it. I like to work with writers and collaborate with filmmakers and creatives, and I'll give feedback on the scripts and help them strengthen it. And it will come down to, do I like this person? Do I like the story? Are they malleable to feedback? Do they handle it well? Do I have to hold their hand a lot of the time through this? Because, you've got to remember that a producer is doing all this essentially for free at this point in time. They're giving you all of their time to help you develop and workshop something that they believe will make money, but it's not going to make them money for several years. At that particular point in time, when you come to them with a script, you're probably at least 1 to 2 years away from getting the film made. So I guess people just have to be mindful of when they're approaching a producer, what they're approaching a producer with. Have you got a script that's, you've done your grammar and your spell check, you know your structure, your technical formatting, you've got a good story, you've had people read it back to you or give you feedback on it already that do know script writing. You're not always going to have those options, obviously, and it doesn't necessarily, for someone like me, it doesn't mean a hard no. None of those things are done. But if you're expecting me then to take something you've done and purchase it from you and then go and, spend 2 years of my own time trying to turn it into something that may or may not happen, but, for me, it's less likely to happen. Other producers prefer it. It just depends on who you're reaching out to and what kind of films they've done. And that's definitely something you need to look into when you're approaching people, is what other films have they done? Have they done something similar to this, or do they like this particular genre? Do they do a lot of films in this genre? There's a lot to think about, and it can be very overwhelming. But I think if you're trying to put your best foot forward, it's like a job interview. Like, you don't go into a job interview, your t-shirt half untucked and your hair disheveled and, you smell bad. You go into an interview, you smell good, you look good, you look professional, you're neat, you're tidy, you're presentable, hopefully.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. You're asking somebody to kind of take on your project and work with you to build it out and make it something that they can sell. So why wouldn't you want to put your best foot forward? Have a script that's solid. Have it to the point where you feel that you are putting your best foot forward with it. Now, it's not going to be perfect. Like, I'm not expecting somebody to put their, a perfect script in, because that's never going to happen. But just do your due diligence. Make sure you haven't got that. Make sure you haven't got spelling mistakes, grammatical errors. Look at other scripts and make sure you're formatting it properly and all that sort of stuff. And don't be afraid to take feedback when it comes back from a producer. Like, a lot of them will just say no. I tend to kind of say no and why. It's not enough. It's not far enough along for me, or you need to do more work on this, or this is what you need to do with your characters. But yeah, I've almost forgotten the question now.
No. You actually, everything you've mentioned, I think, is fantastic, which leads on from that question. One of the things I actually want to talk about now, because I met you through my movie The Party Bus. You produced that for me. And I remember during the editing process, we put the rough cut together. You watched it, and of course you give me the feedback. And one of the things that I really loved, I was actually only saying this to somebody the other day, is there were certain scenes where you said, look, this scene, yep, they're good scenes in their own right. The acting is really good and so forth, but get rid of them. And you said get rid of them because it doesn't move the story forward. Yes, the performances are great. It's been shot really well and so forth. Talk to me about that sort of process, because for me, at the time I was like, oh, okay, I'm losing 10 minutes of my movie here. But even now, I actually only just watched The Party Bus the other day, and I was like, it actually definitely is a tighter movie. And I just remember looking at where those scenes used to be, thinking, that part would have definitely dragged on a bit more had those scenes stayed in.
Yeah. Well, I think it's essentially the same thing as the script editing process. When when you get to a point in the film where obviously you're not going to remove everything in a script, you kind of tend to you don't want to have anything in the script that's superfluous that you don't need to film, because when you're filming, it costs a lot of money. But if you've gone through the process and you have a film finished and there's a couple of scenes in there that were great in the script but don't necessarily hit it in the film when you're watching the film, and there's pacing to consider in a film, there is definitely kind of little bits and pieces to think about and consider in more detail when you're in that editing process, that when you kind of look at a film overall and you watch it, and if you find yourself sitting there going, this feels like it's dragging on, then it probably is. And it's very hard when
the film that comes to my mind is Mr. Turner. And if you haven't watched it, don't, because it's 2.5 hours of the most anticlimactical film that you'll never get back, where you go, oh, it'll happen now, and then nothing, and then he dies, and it's the end of the film. And I appreciate it's a historical film. It just was the most boring 2.5 hours.
Yeah, well, there you go. So I haven't seen that, but yeah, it's sometimes people make films and that's all it is. It's an expression of a story. And like, whenever you watch a true story in a film, it's not going to be ever 100% accurate unless it's something like that where they've made it 100% accurate. And sometimes it just turns out to be kind of boring to watch someone's life. But I think ultimately film, opinions are, everybody has one. So what one person might find completely boring to watch, someone else might find interesting, and it could appeal to certain people, those sorts of films. But generally, as an audience member, you want to feel like you're on a journey and you're being sort of taken along this ride and watching this film, and things are happening, and it keeps you engaged. And if a film isn't doing that, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad film. You could make an amazing film, but the editing could let it down. Or you could have a terrible script and make a subpar film, and the editing could fix it. So there's lots of variations between having a script and then the final product. And I often say that you make 3 movies in the process of making a film. And one is on paper, the second one is when you shoot it, and the third one is when you edit it. And they're 3 different films. And when you're kind of going through the editing process and you're watching how these characters are played out on screen as opposed to how you read it on paper, they can be vastly different. So you kind of have to watch the film with a different perspective, because now you're watching it played out in front of you. When you're reading a script, and I often say this to people, there's often a time where people will read the script and what you write on paper isn't necessarily everything that's in your head or what you want people to see. And there is sometimes a disconnect with writers and what they put on paper and then what their vision of the final film is. And I've seen it happen where you can get to a final, cut of a film, and if a writer sees it and they weren't, they'll go, well, why hasn't this come across in this character? Because that was supposed to happen. And if you went through the steps, you would probably see that it was never actually written down on paper in the first place. It was, just something that the writer had in mind and didn't describe it on paper, and that happens quite a lot. But in terms of getting to the final point, and you're watching the film and you're watching edits, and you can feel it. Like, I've watched enough films in my life, and I love certain different films. But I like it when they just keep moving along and they keep you kind of guessing, and you don't really know what's going to happen. And they don't kind of go into these lulls where, unless it's a specific type of film, like, there are certain films that come to mind where I kind of go, these are not dragging you along by the edge of your seat films, but they still keep you engaged. When you talk about action in a film, you're not necessarily talking about car chases and shootout sequences.
No.
Characters have to have actions, they have to have through lines, they have to have goals, and you have to be invested in those as an audience member. So when anything you see on screen isn't really working towards the character's overall arc and their goal and the development of the story, they won't sit right when you watch it. And essentially, like, it's hard to put a finger on it, specifically, but it is something that when you watch it and you sit there and you go, this isn't working. And you can just sort of feel it when you watch it and know that it's not adding to what the character's trying to achieve. And it doesn't mean that it's badly filmed or that it's not working or that it's badly acted. It just means that it's not really adding to the overall story and the overall, kind of pace of the film.
Definitely.
Mm.
Tell me, these days, especially for the past, I suppose, 10 years, there's been a big push in the industry, women in film. And we've obviously seen in Hollywood lots of, female cast remakes, there's women directors and so forth. Talk to me about your experience of being a woman working in film and how that journey's been for you, from a high point and from a low point. It's been pretty hairy at times. I've probably been attacked by work colleagues about 3 or 4 times now. Wow.
Male work colleagues. Haven't always felt safe in the environments I've worked in. I was in one of the first jobs I did as a broadcast technician. I was the only female apart from the receptionist in the company of about 100 plus people. I got absolutely ribbed for it. I got teased relentlessly about it. And this was all pre-Me Too. So, I lost 2 jobs complaining about the workplace as a woman, and sort of being told that one of the people I worked for basically said, I don't want to hear you complaining because, the hours are long, the pay is shit, and the bosses can't deal with it.
Wow.
And that was my introduction to the job, and I think I didn't last very long there, but I lasted a lot longer than most other jobs I'd done, but I eventually got physically attacked at that workplace as well, so I left. All sorts of stuff I've been through, in sort of probably right from trying to get into acting and things happening in acting and being told what I would need to do to get certain places and how I should do this with my body and what I should do with it to get where I needed to go, and the things that I would need to forego as a female producer in order to sort of get by and succeed in this industry, and the things that I would lose along the way, like my empathy and care for other people. And
so basically very sort of Harvey Weinstein kind of things, yeah?
Yes, yeah, very much so. And I have come across a lot of those sorts of people, unfortunately. And yes, it has all been men in my experience to this point. I've never had any other form of gender, no matter what it is, come at me like that. So unfortunately, it was a very male-dominated industry when I first started, and I actually had an experience recently that brought kind of brought tears to my eyes, because I was over in LA and I was working out of the Australians in film offices over there, which was amazing. A great group of people and very supportive of Australian filmmakers. And I met another sort of young person, non-binary, so I'll refer to them as they, them, but their gender at birth was female. So they've come up through an industry at a time where it's a lot, there are still challenges and there's still problems and there's still things that need to be fixed. But it's obviously a better time now to be who you are as a person and try to be yourself than it was like back when say you and I were coming up and going through stuff. And for me, you know, I was sitting there talking to this person one day and they just turned around and stopped and sort of said, you know, thank you. I went, what for? And they were like, well, for blazing the way, for being somebody that had to deal with this stuff and get through this stuff and still survived it and succeeded regardless or despite this happening to you. And they were like, this, you know, it's helped. You know, I'm probably paraphrasing a little bit, but yeah, that's essentially what they were saying to me now. And I stopped for a second. I was like, oh, wow, I never really thought of it that way. You know, I never really had anybody thank me for going through what I went through at the hands of some pretty horrible people in the industry. And putting up with what I've had to put up with in all of the workplaces throughout my teens and 20s and 30s that were very male dominated. Nobody's ever thanked me for being a female and going through all of that. So I was like, I got a little bit emotional and I was like, wow. I said, well, thank you for for thanking me. I've never had anybody do that. And it is a sign of how much times have changed that there is that ability to have these discussions now. And while, you know, I think there is still a disparity in pay and there's still disparity in a lot of different things, and there's a lot of issues still out in the world, unfortunately. But it is nice. It's nice on one hand to see it getting better and to see it improving. But then there's also a grieving taking place of not having that when I was coming up through the industry.
Yeah, I understand that feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're grieving lost time, or you grieve, like, if, you know, because a lot of things these days are focused on, and quite rightly so, focused on how do we support young people coming up in the arts? How do we give them opportunities? But as a 40-plus-year-old person, I'm sitting here going, but what about me? Because I never got those opportunities when I was coming up through the ranks because they didn't support, you know, my gender in film, or they didn't support, you know, what I was trying to do, and I didn't get any of those things.
It really sucks.
So my response,
you know, I mean,
it does. It actually really sucks.
We are the generation who has always been on the cusp of change. Like, sorry to sort of cut in, but when I got into to film and video, I got in when I was about 14, and it was the time where digital video, you know, DV cam, if anyone listening can remember DV cam, was literally just coming in. But I was working for a company on my school holidays that was shooting on Betacam SP, and then they were like, wow, we're going to get Betacam SX, which is digital form of Betacam. And then of course digital Betacam came out. We had DV cam and DV, and but the thing is, I was always on the cusp of change as far as, oh, well, look, a cameraman can go out there and make, you know, Australian-wise, $850 a day as a freelance camera operator. And then by the time I was 18, it's like, oh, yeah, but, you know, now the digital's in and you can buy a camera for $1,000. Well, no, that the day rate's now $200. And like, hang on, what? And I've noticed it, and from a writing point of view, comedian, actor, everything point of view, it's always been, you know, now in my early 40s, it's like, wow, if I could rewind my age by 20 years, when all this growth has happened, all the change, digital technology is amazing with cameras and editing software. People are more accepting of how you want to present yourself to the world and other bits and pieces. They know that we can't be so harsh and say you're not pretty enough or you're not, or whatever it might be. It sucks that our generation has always ridden that cusp of change, and it is hard to not look at younger people, even if they're, you know, 10 years younger, and you think, you lucky bastard.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate, you know, what's the word? It's kind of like a side kind of thing of of growing up at a time when there was so much change and you know, as soon as you kind of decided what you were going to do, the technology had changed again and it was invalid and you couldn't even look to make that sort of money. Like, you know, I remember when marketing and publishing and things like that, the digital era of that came in and I was looking at doing that stuff. And then before I knew it, it was like, oh no, it's all kind of now this and you don't even need that. So then you had to learn a new skill. Like it just felt like my entire life was learning new skills and trying to adapt to a very rapidly changing world.
Yeah.
But I think now what I try to do is I try not to, it's hard to not feel a grief of lost opportunity, I guess, in a way. Because, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, well, now I can still I can still do things that I wanted to do. I may not have the same support that a 20-year-old, you know, might have nowadays, but I can certainly help, you know, knowing that the impact that I can have is still positive, the impact that the change that I can provide and help sort of support others in is still helping and it's still, and, you know, I kind of tended to want to be the person that I never had when I was in my 20s or late teens. And I want to be the person that I didn't have saying to me, don't listen to that agent. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, you've got to just keep pushing, you know, get your representation, keep pushing to be an actor, yada, yada, yada. You know, I'd probably be in a very different place right now. So you do grieve. There is a certain amount of grief that you have to process in how much the world has changed for the better, you know, in a lot of ways, and how, you know, people of our age were not privy to the resulting benefits of that change. You know, we had to kind of suffer through the process of that change. But the world is still changing, and I'm sure every generation that comes after us will probably feel exactly the same.
Well,
but
yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's a generational thing for sure. But I think, you know, just trying to be the person that I didn't have is part of the process of healing from that sense of loss and that grief.
Yeah. So tell me, what is your advice that you can give to any woman out there who is interested in film and who wants to make a career anywhere within the film and entertainment industry?
I either try to give them the opportunity to do so. So by sort of providing equity-driven sets, most of my sets are 50-50, because I just think it's good to provide opportunity for people to learn. You know, I'm also ND friendly, like for my sets and things like that. I support, you know, disabilities, and having had spinal injury myself and all that sort of stuff. You know, it's important to me to provide safe spaces for a plethora of people suffering from similar things or, you know, varying degrees of disability. But for women, in specifically for women, I just try to provide a working environment that they can thrive in. You know, I kind of say to them, you know, create the environment that you want to be in, create the place. And if they're not getting the opportunities, then I will either direct them to somebody who can, or I will give them the opportunity myself if possible. Obviously, I can't do it for everybody. But, you know, it's just about providing safe spaces, because I never had one of those, you know, unless I was home with my family. That was pretty much the only safe space I had. When I was out in the workplace, anything could happen. You know, I would get, I'd have all sorts of things, you know, done to me. So it's important as part of the process of healing from that, or trying to heal from that anyway, is to create environments where anybody, and it's not just applicable to women. There's a lot of men out there and other, you know, other identifying people that struggle to find safe places to be themselves and to express their creativity freely without being ridiculed or attacked. So the advice that I give is probably just be the change, which is very cliche and probably annoying to a lot of people, but like, and just do it. Just go out and do it, and don't let anybody tell you can't do something. That's probably the biggest takeaway from somebody telling me what I couldn't do and me believing that, is now to kind of make sure that people know that they can achieve anything if they put their mind to it. whether they're successful in it, whether they're good at it, whether they make money from it, is not something that I can advise them on. But to just at least go out there and do the thing that makes them happy, that's important. And to pursue the creativity and do what they love, I think is more important in this day and age than trying to conform or not pursuing that passion just because somebody told you weren't pretty enough to.
Yeah, exactly. As we said, the world has changed and moved on for the better. One of the changes I've seen come in and heard about that's coming in is the inclusivity of people from the LGBTQ community and trans people. And whilst I'm all for that, I mean, I've openly say to people, I've got a trans member of my family. She transitioned 15, 17 years ago before it was more socially acceptable. And I'm all for people of all genders and everything working together. I think that's exactly how it needs to be. But at the same time, I've heard, especially in Hollywood, by such and such a year, there has to be at least one representation of somebody from that community in a film. And if you look, for example, a film like 1917, the war movie that came out a few years ago, amazing movie, the production value and the way they put that thing together is sensational. You look at that, and without, sounding, like a bigot or anything like that, you go, but how do you make a historical film where the world wasn't the way it is now? How do you go, well, we'll put a trans person in there as a trans person so that person's got agency? And like, how do you interpret including, those people into film when the story probably doesn't lean toward it because of its nature?
I guess I would probably put the inclusivity behind the camera in that instance. If the story is reflecting a purely historical and has to be accurate, unless you're doing something like, say, a good example of the alternative of that is Bridgerton, for instance. You're taking something that existed in the 1800s and you're changing it to be more inclusive and making it interesting. And because, it wasn't necessarily like that in the 1800s. It was very white in some areas and, people of colour were treated poorly.
It's a wonderful series, isn't it? And it really it breaks down everything. You've got loads of people of colour, loads of strong female roles, and it's an amazing
and it's great.
Series. It's
great.
Yeah.
It's such a great show. I think that's an example of creative, the creative alternative of making something that does provide inclusivity. But, despite the nature of the show and the historical references that it might make, it's not really based in. It's creating a version of history that is more inclusive, which I think it's nice. It's kind of a good way of doing it. But if you're recreating, true. Look, put it this way: if we were recreating a very true, historically accurate version of the 1800s. People without teeth wouldn't exist. You'd have to have yellow, half disintegrated teeth. Their breath would be smelly. The wigs would be gross. And in reality, it wasn't necessarily a very pretty time, in history. And things, the cleanliness levels were far below what they are today. So history is never really accurately depicted anyway. So in some ways, it's a fine line because some people can use it as an excuse not to include people that are of a minority or are diverse, but then don't necessarily accurately represent historically what the time was anyway. And look, a lot of history is not really clearly known anyway. And if people want to rewrite or change things to create something that's an alternative version of a story, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it only comes down to when you're trying to say this is historically accurate, but that's a separate thing. It's like, well, it's historically I'm trying to represent it as accurately as possible. Then, and you can't say George Washington was Mexican. You know what I mean? Like, unless you're doing an alternative version of that where he was, and it's an interesting story, that can be done. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're trying to make something historically accurate, But, time and time again, that's been proven to not matter. And I think that's where the argument comes in. When you look at things like, I'm trying to think of a really good example here. There are actors that have been cast in roles that were predominantly, say, like an Asian character, and they weren't Asian. Like, you look at all the films from the 50s and the 40s and the 60s, and there are a lot of white actors cast as Asian roles and Asian characters, and they would wear tape on their eyes to make themselves look Asian.
Oh, wow.
So, it's more about, I think, correcting the equilibrium of, like, making sure that characters are represented more accurately. But if it's it's a creative work and it's not trying to be representing anything in particular that's historically accurate, I don't think it matters. As for ticking boxes, there are a lot of people that belong in those boxes that don't like being a box, and that's part of the problem. Like, it shouldn't come down to being a box that we have to tick. It should just be something that happens naturally, and should be done. Unfortunately, we have boxes to tick because it's not something that happens naturally at this point in time.
Yeah.
The inclusivity behind the camera, I don't think is terribly hard to achieve at all. When you're talking about in front of the camera, I think it has to come down to whether or not you're representing something historically accurate, or if you're doing a creative work where it doesn't matter, then what would it matter? So
it's interesting because I know through actually our experience of trying to get another project off the ground, one of the producers that we've been talking to and working with has said to us, "Oh, look, if you're going to submit your script for funding, I'm not going to mention the funding body, but it would be advantageous to have somebody who's trans as a part of the production team. It would be advantageous to have multiple women, because these days it's not about a good story. From some funding bodies, it's about, well, do you tick those boxes of diversity? And if you do, then we'll look at your script." What's your attitude? Like, do you think that's fair when it comes to telling a story? Because at the end of the day, entertainment, film, TV, and so forth, it's about telling story, human emotional stories. And do you think that ticking those boxes of diversity, either for or against a project, do you think that's a fair way of actually saying which stories get produced and which ones don't?
I think that at the moment it's a very difficult process. I don't think it's always right, and I don't think it's always wrong. I think there's a balance, and it's very frustrating, I think, when you're trying to make a movie and nobody wants to give you money because it's a white writer or it's a male writer. And I think equity means just that. It needs to be equal, and that means including everybody, including white men. But historically, they have had the advantage for a very long time. So I guess the ticking boxes is a way of trying to redistribute the balance to certain things. I think the story has to demand it. I think the story is what drives those decisions. So for me, a good example of what I've tried to do to be inclusive in the way that I approach filmmaking is the story needs to determine it. And if the story doesn't determine it, then what's the problem with including it here or there? If the story determines that it has to be a specific person that should be included, like I'm working on a film at the moment that's it's a story written by a white male based on based around the people that he grew up with, living in an Indigenous community, living in a mining community, and it's a really great story, and it does focus on race towards Indigenous people, and the lead character is Indigenous and is the hero of the film. And, we have been told, and nobody really needed to tell me, because, like, from the very beginning when I first started working on the project, I was like, I want to get an Indigenous writer on this. I want to have an Indigenous director, because they're going to understand the motivation, the story, the experience of this character, the lived experience of this character is important. And that is what determines how I bring the creative voices in and who comes in as a creative voice.
Is this the film we did the script read for together a few years ago?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I thought so. It was actually a really great script, actually.
Yeah, it's a really great script and it's a really great story. It is difficult to get those stories up because, funnily enough, because of that reason, like I have an Indigenous director, I have an Indigenous writer, there's an Indigenous lead actor. There's a lot of I'm even looking at bringing in an Indigenous producer to work with me up in the Northern Territory to make sure that we're respecting, country and community and all those sorts of things. But it does come back to the fact that it was a white bloke that wrote it quite a lot. And it's unfortunate because it's his lived experience too, and it's characters that and every character that he's kind of written in his film is based on somebody that he knew and that he grew up with. So it's kind of hard because you want to balance it out and say, well, yes, it's an Indigenous character, so yes, it has to have an Indigenous voice behind it, but it shouldn't be disqualified because a white bloke wrote it. And unfortunately, it does have that working against it, which I think, while I understand the reasons why, I think it can't be a blanket across the board response to where a story's come from. So it's a slippery slope. It's a dangerous slope to be on. I think it's important that the story demand the voice behind it being authentic. I think that's probably where we should be coming from more than ticking boxes. And, I think it's important that the female characters in a film have agency and they're not just there as catalysts or as excuses for men to do shitty things. So having female input into a script is important as well. And there's nothing that says you can't have 2 or 3 or 4 writers on a script. But you also don't want to lose the authenticity of the voice behind the story. And, so it's a balance. I really do think that it's a balance that we need to maintain instead of just it's about this person, or it's just about ticking boxes. Like, I don't think anybody really appreciates that it's just about ticking. Nobody wants to be a box. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think any of us that fall into minority or alternative kind of things want to be a box on a piece. I want to be hired because I'm good at what I do, not because I'm a box.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the frustrating. It's the alternative behind the whole. Yeah, it's great that we've got boxes because it means we have to think about these things and actually employ people and bring people onto a project that don't often get the opportunity to have that voice. But I think instead of possibly creating projects where I think it just should be more about supporting those different voices rather than forcing them into a box that they don't necessarily want to be in. So I think it's about supporting authentic voices, unique voices, definitely, and providing a balance and opportunity to people that don't often get them. But I don't think any of us really want to be a box that gets ticked. I think we all just want to be treated fairly and equally and have the same opportunity. And that's what they're trying to create. That's what they're trying to do. I don't know if it's the best way to do it. There are smarter people out there that can figure that out. But for me, it's about the authenticity behind the story and making sure that the voices that are heard are important to the story. So I will always bring in someone who's had the lived experience over necessarily getting a box ticked. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'd rather bring in somebody who's got the voice and the unique lived experience of a character. But having said that, there are lots of people out there that write amazing characters that haven't necessarily lived that experience. But, you only enrich a story, I think, by bringing in those authentic and unique voices. And, being a box on an application, while I understand, the necessity behind it, I think we all want to get to a society where we're not boxes. we're all included and we're all naturally part of the selection process rather than, you have to bring this person in just because, they're a woman. Like, I never want to be brought in just because I'm a woman. You know what I mean?
As you said before, you want to be recognised that, you're good at doing your job, you've worked really well on other projects before, and I need that person, no matter who they are or how they identify, I want that person on this film.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm very conscious of bringing in a lot of diverse voices and diverse talent. So for me, it's a very natural thing to bring in a variety of different people and of different sort of various levels and stages and backgrounds and culture and everything into a project, but I did get once hired just because I was a woman, and it just doesn't feel that good, and maybe it's because, I've gotten more opportunity more recently, so maybe that's, I can't really speak to people who still aren't getting opportunities. Maybe they do appreciate having a box that needs to be ticked because otherwise they're not going to get the opportunity. So
no,
it's hard. It is definitely a slippery slope. We want to include people just because they're good at what they do. They have an authentic and unique voice, and that needs to be heard. But I think we want to get to a point where that's happening naturally and that we don't have to be ticking boxes. And that's quite possibly what they're trying to achieve, which I hope that's what they're trying to achieve. But I don't know if that's the best way to do it. But
well, as we said, I mean, is it a good story? Those are the things that hopefully will prevail. Like, yes, you've got diversity in genders and races and so forth, but is it a good story? And as you said at the beginning of the interview, is it going to sell? Is it going to make its money back? And a part of that is people are going to be emotionally invested in the story that we're telling, and that really, from my point of view, as far as filming content is concerned, that trumps everything.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that there's a vast audience out there that gets neglected a lot of the time, and I think that's where the box ticking comes in. It's like, let's make films, let's make projects that appeal and speak to people of varying backgrounds and cultures and disabilities. And to be quite honest, yes, I see a lot of white females on screen, but I don't see that. It's very hard for me to see something on screen that really represents me as a person in a lot of different ways due to my spinal injury and other things that I have. And so I do, I think, have a higher awareness of having equity as storytelling, equity in storytelling and equity on set, and providing the opportunities for people who haven't had them before. I do think that I'm lucky that I have had first-hand experience of being treated differently because I'm not a typical, human being, and I don't function typically like a lot of other people do. So I think for me it's a little bit easier, and maybe I don't appreciate the boxes because it's like, I don't think we should be boxes. I think we should just be making a concerted effort to be better people and include, have diversity naturally in what we do. I mean, Australia itself, even though it's predominantly white, we're all mutts. We've all come from somewhere else. We all have backgrounds that traverse different countries, and predominantly UK and England and Scotland, but also Europe. And Melbourne has one.
In a huge way. I mean, my parents, I mean, my dad's English. My mum's first generation Australian, but my mum's parents came from Latvia and Yugoslavia. My dad's mum was German, and that's the thing, go. So there's no such thing these days as, this culture only in every, and anybody who ever says to me, oh, what's Australia? Like, the first words I always usually say is multicultural. And the sad thing is, from an Australian filmmaking point of view, one of the things that I've always noticed is that a lot of the funding bodies still like to fund films that portray Australia how it was, like in the 60s and 70s, where, g'day mate, how are you, Bruce, and oh, she's a good Sheila. And that's Australia that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that the Australian film industry has probably got a lot of they've got a long way to go to actually represent Australia as it is, whereas other countries do it very well.
I think they're definitely trying more so now. There's definitely content that I see getting made that does represent a much broader demographic of what the community actually looks like these days. You know, we have such, I mean, it's kind of interesting if you really kind of sat down and asked somebody to define what an actual Australian is. I mean, I personally don't really know what an Aussie is. You know, specifically, if you said to me, what's the traits of being Australian? Most people say, oh, you know, fair go. That's just having a fair go, you know, or something like that. But that's not really a determinant of who you are necessarily, or your background or your culture. And we have such an amazing mixture of cultures here. I think Melbourne is probably one of the most multicultural cities in Australia, and this is where I grew up. And, you know, growing up, my best mate was Hungarian. I went to school with people from all over the world, and it was fascinating. I loved it. Like, it didn't feel un-Australian to me. It just felt like normal. This is what Australia is. It's multicultural. It's people from all different walks of life, immigrants with all sorts of backgrounds and varying degrees of experiences from those backgrounds. And that's what Australia is. It's been, you know, the only true residents and true original Australians are Indigenous people. You know, they've been here for over 100,000 years or however long it's been. It's, you know, it's just a fascinating, it's a fascinating discussion to have, really. But it does kind of digress us away from film, though.
It does. Well, I mean, moving back onto film and wrapping this up, what does the future hold as far as projects that you're working on and other steps forward that you want to take along your journey?
I mean, the film industry at the moment is in a little bit of disarray with AI and all the stuff that's happening, and you know, it is difficult to figure out where you fit in the landscape. But like I say, I do believe cinema is going to make a comeback, and it's like stage. Like, everybody thought cinema was going to be the death of stage, and it never was. And I think my personal kind of hope is that AI becomes a genre, a subgenre, rather than taking over the industry. And I would happily watch AI films as a genre. I think it'd be kind of cool to see what people come up with in that world, in that technology. I don't want to see it replace traditional filmmaking. I don't want to see it sort of negate people's livelihoods as it potentially has the power to do. I think we can coexist with it like everything else. I think it's just a tumultuous time where we figure out where we all fit in to this new landscape. So it's kind of hard to know exactly, for me, what the future holds. Like, if my hope of it becoming a subgenre is fulfilled, then I know I'm going to be making movies until the day I die, whenever that may be. For me, I've got so many films that I'm working on. There are a handful that are kind of very close to being filmed and going and getting financed, but even that's a struggle. So in this current climate, getting financing in place can be difficult, and working through a lot of the issues around financing, because obviously with the film industry in a bit of upset, it's difficult to get financiers to feel confident and comfortable putting money into film. So I think it's just a matter of persevere. I mean, my motto is always like perseverance, patience, and passion are what drive me and keep me going. And I think, you know, I'm hoping that over the next couple of years, I'll probably get about 5 to 10 films out of varying degrees and varying budgets and varying types of stories and backgrounds and different voices. But that's, yeah, for me, it is a little bit difficult to say where we're all going to end up with the industry, but I do hope it's a positive outcome.
Yeah, well, I think, as you said at the very beginning of the interview, if you follow your passion, that's first and foremost the most important thing, and it leads where it leads, and you just enjoy the journey along the way.
That's right.
Yes,
exactly.
Lucinda, it's been amazing to have you on the Identity Crisis podcast, sharing all of your stories, and I hope that there are filmmakers and writers and want-to-be producers out there who have listened to this, who have taken inspiration and some really good, positive reinforcement of, you can do this, keep going. So thank you so much for sharing everything you have with us here today.
No worries. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode. And remember, it's only an identity crisis if you choose to make it one. It's okay to not be okay. So speak up and talk to someone, or be the one that someone can turn to in their time of need. Don't forget to follow this podcast wherever you're listening. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show, send me an email at jnewtzcomedy@gmail.com. I'm JNewtz, and I'll see you next time.